Welcome to Felon, a true crime podcast. In this, our debut episode, we explore a shocking case that destroyed a family and has haunted a community for over 40 years. Just a heads up, as is the case with most true crime stories, there will be details included in this podcast that are of an extremely graphic nature. The listener discretion is, of course, advised. Wednesday, the 1st of July, 1970. In the hours around midnight, a 1956 FE Holden sedan rattles through the night. Headlights illuminate the road directly in front, but beyond that, darkness. The moonlight, diffused by the bleak sheet of clouds, filters through lightly on the face of the driver as he navigates the winding road. He stares into the darkness, expressionless. His passengers lie silent in the back. The stretch of road now hugs jagged cliffs of the coastline. Waves lap at the base of the treacherous rock walls. The 3-hour drive will be over soon. The driver veers from the main road and pulls up to stop in a car park clearing. Thursday, the 2nd of July, 1970. Approximately 1:30 p.m, a family visiting the Port Campbell National Park take some time to explore the cliffs near a blowhole. They make their way from the main road into a car park near the cliffs. Wandering the area, the gaze of the mother, Ellen, quickly turns from the panoramic coastal landscape and focuses on something strange in the foreground. Tire tracks veer from the car park and swerve down the slope towards the ocean. Ellen follows the tracks until she discovers that they terminate at the top of the cliff face. The rocks and ocean lie 20 meters below. Fearing the worst, Ellen, now trailed by her family, makes her way as close to the drop as she can, then stops. When her family catches up, the gaze is fixed on an object below, and she is pointing at it in bewilderment. At the base of the cliff lies the mangled wreck of a Holden sedan, balancing precariously close to the water. David, Ellen's husband, had brought binoculars with him, anticipating that he would use them to get a better view of the blowhole. This allowed him to further inspect the wreckage from a safe distance. He could now see that the driver's door was open, but there was no sign of anyone in the driver's seat. He wondered whether the car had been empty and simply pushed off the cliff by thrill seekers, or if this was a scene of something far more devastating. Maybe there was someone manning the car as it went over, and they'd been thrown from the vehicle upon impact. Maybe they had landed in the ocean that was now lapping at the car. Upon further inspection of the vehicle, David's gaze through the binocular lenses caught hold of something that would offer a far more serious explanation of the scene. Through the salty ocean spray, he could now make out a length of black hose connected to the car's exhaust pipe. The hose running from the exhaust pipe across the roof of the car and into the car's interior. This revelation added far more weight to the already disturbing scene. The family decided it was a matter for the police and hurriedly made their way towards the township of Port Campbell to alert them of their discovery. Upon their arrival at the Port Campbell police station, the Henrys were greeted by Constable Duncan Hales. Hales took a statement detailing what they had witnessed at the scene of the cliffs. An obvious red flag for Hales was the hose from the exhaust running through the window of the car. The more he heard, the more it seemed like a suicide. The Henrys had quickly taken down the number plate of the vehicle before making their way to the station. Constable Hales ran a check on the stolen car database. At this stage, the car wasn't listed as stolen. Hales called the Office of Vehicle Registrations in Melbourne. to determine an owner. License plate HKU 061 was registered to an Elmer Crawford, Cardinal Road, in a northern suburb of Melbourne, Glenroy. Constable Hales attended the scene of the grim discovery, the Henrys showing him to the site. Hales observed the car through the binoculars and confirmed the sighting of the hose. There was further evidence at the scene that confirmed the deliberate nature of the event. The Henrys had also relayed to Hales at the station that when they were leaving, they had noticed deep drainage gutters near the tyre tracks had been filled with limestone rocks to act as a bridge. The car tracks started here, crossed the makeshift rock bridge, and continued down towards the ocean. Without the rocks in this drainage channel, there would be no way for a car to access the cliff. Someone had spent a lot of time and effort to ensure the car could make it to the ocean at this particular point. Hales reflected on this, and the more he thought, the stranger it seemed. There was a vast amount of access points to the coast that would be far easier to reach by car. He wondered why they had chosen this location. Hales quickly enlisted the help of a local emergency rescue worker, George Cumming. Cumming knew these parts well and had simulated rescue situations with dummies. He was experienced in navigating up and down the cliffs. Cumming called in Tom Mackenzie, Les Gunn, and Gus Ward, his fellow volunteer rescue colleagues. They gathered necessary rescue supplies and met with Constable Hales. Hales gave them a briefing of the situation, and the men made their way to the blowhole region. Approximately 4 p.m, Thursday the 2nd of July. The men reached the top of the cliff at the scene of the wreck. A sturdy peg was driven into the soft ground at the top of the cliff and a rope was attached. This rope would be Cumming's means of accessing the car. With a few jerks of the rope to ensure it was stable, he began his descent down the rock face to the ledge that cradled the broken car below. As he approached the car, he first noticed a mess of scattered debris lying around it. Apples, electrical tape, a butter knife, live .22 caliber cartridges, along with the expected wreckage from a car that had experienced a heavy impact. Cumming could now see in detail the hose that had caused the initial alarm. It was fitted tightly to the exhaust. It was attached to the roof rack to prevent it from falling off, and it terminated at the driver's window, which was wound up to wedge it in place. The open space of the window was stuffed with rags. Inspecting the car closer through the misty windows, Cumming could see that the rear seat was missing, and in the back lay a tarpaulin and blankets strewn throughout the boot in a tangled mess. The impact of the landing had driven the front seat into the dashboard. From the cliff above, Constable Hales communicated with Cumming and prompted him as he continued to search the wreck, Cumming reporting back what he observed. He opened the rear door to take a closer look inside. Plastic containers, a car battery, a toolbox. A cardboard box containing electrical equipment and a tangled mess of wound up wiring caught his eye, and he mentioned it to Hales. Hales, wanting some sort of evidence collected from the car in case it teetered into the ocean overnight, instructed him to retrieve the box. Leaning carefully through the open door, Cumming reached for it. Suddenly, he was hit with the pungent odour of rotting meat. He could see random blood spatters and a .22 caliber rifle. This discovery making the scene all the more menacing. Yet, with all the signs of death, there was no sign of a body. Perhaps the driver had been thrown from the vehicle upon impact. Perhaps someone had been killed in the car and dumped somewhere else, and the car rolled off the cliff. Relaying the grim discovery to Hales, he was then advised to collect the rifle along with the box. With the objects in hand, Hales gave the word for him to return to the base of the cliff, for them to pull him up before darkness started to set in. Returning to the police station, Hales carefully examined the items. A rifle, seemingly unfired, but was found loaded with a full magazine of cartridges. A box containing a packet of biscuits, a makeshift baton constructed from a hose filled with lead, family photos, and some old bank books. Along with these items, there was a long extension cord and 5 shorter lengths of electrical cable, each attached to alligator clips. These items were pieces of a morbid puzzle and would soon fall into place. Following the discovery and search of the car, Hales reported the findings to the Criminal Investigation Bureau in Warrnambool. With the intel given to them by Constable Hales, Warrnambool CIB quickly alerted the nearest CIB office to Glenroy, this being located in the nearby suburb of Broadmeadows. Beginning with the knowledge they had of the vehicle being registered to an Elmer Crawford of Glenroy, police set about to get to the bottom of the mystery. At this point, they had only scratched the surface. Thursday, the 2nd of July, 6:10 p.m. Approximately 2 hours had passed since the search of the car at the edge of the ocean. Constable John McCarty had been assigned to attend the Crawford household to see if he could track down the owner of the vehicle. It was already dark when he arrived at the house. Constable McCarty made his way along the driveway and knocked on the door, attempting to peer through the front windows next to the entrance. Beyond the gaps in the Venetian blinds, there was only darkness. The house was still. No sound, no movement within. McCarty quickly made some rounds of neighbouring houses to determine whether anyone had seen the Crawford family throughout the day. They hadn't. Things were starting to look bleak for Elmer and his family. Elmer Kyle Crawford was 41 years old and lived at the Cardinal Road residence with his wife Teresa, aged 35. The couple had 2 daughters, Catherine, who was 13 at the time, and Karen, who was 6. They also had a son, James, who was 8. Elmer was a quiet man who worked as an unlicensed electrician for the Victorian Racing Club at the Flemington workshops. He was described by neighbours as being pleasant but standoffish, preferring to spend time tinkering in his home workshop rather than socialising. Despite his shyness though, he seemed to be well liked in the community, allowing children to ride on the back of his motor scooter and repairing bikes for the neighbourhood kids. He was also the go-to guy for household electrical repairs. Teresa, Elmer's wife, spent her days tending to the needs of the children and household chores. She was well liked within the street and enjoyed socialising. Neighbours' children would come and go in the Crawford household, and many people have recalled fond times they spent there at house parties or sleepovers with the Crawford children. Despite this happiness within the household, Teresa had experienced a period of darkness in her life. Documentation suggests that Teresa suffered an emotional breakdown following the birth of the couple's 3rd child. This had some impact on Elmer and Teresa's marriage, but all accounts seem to indicate that she made a full recovery and the family seemed to be flourishing. Elmer had a well-paying job, savings in the bank, and even managed to purchase a number of blocks of land in Queensland. He had spoken of leaving these blocks to his children. In 1970, Glenroy was a quiet suburb. The suburb sat approximately 13 kilometres north of Melbourne's CBD. It has been described by residents as being quite dull. Families going about their business in a buzz of monotony. Elmer and Teresa had settled into this same monotony. Elmer worked, Teresa took care of things around the house, and their children attended schools close to home. It has been mentioned that the only excitement in the area was in the form of an odd car accident or house fire, and they were few and far between. Elmer was an Irish immigrant. He had relocated to Melbourne and had quickly found work at the VRC, working as an unqualified electrician, his skills allowing him to progress through the ranks quickly. Teresa had left her family in rural Queensland, a northern Australian state on the east coast, for the bright lights of Melbourne. The couple had met at a dance, and they had hit it off. Before long, Teresa was pregnant with their first child. It seemed fitting that the two should get married following this news. Teresa, having a Catholic background, felt it wasn't a good look to be pregnant out of wedlock, and with that, they were married, purchased a block of land in Glenroy, and built a house for a family on it, settling into married bliss. It wasn't long before another 2 more children came along, quickly filling the 3-bedroom home. The same home Constable McCarty had just visited. Thursday, the 2nd of July, just before 7 p.m. With no sign of the Crawford family as yet, it was vital that a thorough search for them be conducted. Since he was unable to determine their whereabouts, Constable McCarty contacted Broadmeadows CIB, who in turn passed on the findings to homicide detectives. Blood and a firearm found at the scene of the car necessitated their involvement, and now the urgency had peaked. Investigations had established that Elmer was also the owner of a motor scooter, the same he used to carry neighbourhood children for joyrides. Knowledge of this scooter was of importance to them, and they set about trying to track down its location. Just after 7:30 p.m, the homicide squad made a phone call to Patricia McCurlin, a neighbour of the Crawfords, to assist them in the task of checking whether the scooter was at the Crawford residence. Reluctantly, she made her way over to the Crawford house, accompanied by a friend. The two entered the side driveway, passed through the gates, and into the backyard. Across the yard, they could see Elmer's scooter. Patricia quickly scurried back to her house to pass on her findings to the homicide squad. Later that night, around 10 p.m, Constable McCarty was due to be finishing his shift. Prior to clocking off, he received a call instructing him to return to Broadmeadows Police Station, pick up another police officer, and to make a second visit to the Crawford household. This time, it seemed more urgent. At around 10:15 p.m, McCarty had picked up Detective Wild, a member of Broadmeadows CIB, and returned to the Crawford residence. Again, the lights were out, and there was no sign of life from within. They knocked on the front door. No answer. They shone their flashlights through the windows. Still no sign of anyone. Being aware of the urgency of their visit, the two made their way through to the backyard. After a few minutes of scouting the place for a way to enter without having to break anything, a partially open window on the rear of the house gave them the easy means of entry they needed. McCarty made his way in and moved through to the front of the house to open the door for Detective Wild. Slipping from room to room, the pair flicked on light switches, and with each click, quickly revealing a scene that neither were prepared for. The morning of Friday, the 3rd of July, 1970, police and rescue workers gathered at the top of the cliff at the scene of the car wreck. Constable McCarty and Detective Wild's discovery the night prior had added a new light on the situation, and now there was a new sense of urgency to retrieve the battered car. Approximately 10:30 a.m, George Cumming, accompanied by Cess Burgeon, Charlie Coxon and a police photographer, made his second descent down the cliff face towards the wreck. They had been briefed above on how to stabilise the car in order to prevent it tipping into the ocean. Once the car was secure and had been hauled away from the edge, they proceeded to search the interior yet again. Opening the rear door, Cumming was greeted by the familiar meaty odour of the previous night. Burgeon reached in and pulled back a section of the tarpaulin. The discovery of what lay under the tarp prompted Cumming to grab his radio and again relay his findings to Constable Hales. The police photographer, sensing a change in Cumming's demeanour, moved closer and focused his camera lens on the discovery: a pair of human feet. The scene unravelled like a bandage being removed from a wound. With each layer of tarp and blanket that was peeled back, the photographer snapped more gory details. Blood spatterings, live .22 caliber cartridges, electrical leads, a blood-stained rock, and hammers. The most disturbing, however, was the tragic yet expected discovery of 4 human bodies. A mother and her 3 children dressed in their pajamas. Friday, 3rd of July, 6:30 p.m. The bodies of the 4 Crawfords lay in a Geelong hospital waiting an autopsy. Samples were taken from the bodies, then further examinations commenced. When the blood and dirt had been cleared from their cold skin, closer inspection revealed that each child had received blows to the head from either a pick or a hammer, causing fracturing of their skulls. Their mother, Teresa, had no sign of fractures, but there was evidence of being struck by a blunt object. She also had an alligator clip and electrical cable attached to her ear, similar to that found in the mysterious box Cumming had retrieved from the car. Burn marks consistent with these implements were also visible on the children. It was quickly established that Alma Kyle Crawford was the main suspect for the murders. These fatal injuries were sustained in the family home, 3 hours away, at the crime scene that McCarty and Wild discovered the night prior. Upon first inspection, it was a mess of blood strewn randomly throughout the house. But closer examination by detectives and forensic experts painted a detailed picture of the ordeal. In his book titled Almost Perfect, author Greg Fogarty gives a chilling account of the events that transpired in the Crawford home prior to the car being dumped at Port Campbell. Based on police evidence, his account details the timeline of the murders as the following. Wednesday, the 1st of July, 1970, approximately 8 p.m. Elmer approached his wife Teresa from behind while she sat at the dining table. He struck her on the head with a thick piece of rubber hose filled with lead. Teresa slumped to the floor, still alive but unconscious. She was then dragged to the master bedroom. She was laid on the bed, and Elmer attached a makeshift electrical cable to her ear and her right hand. The other end of the cable was attached to the mains power socket. As he flicked the switch, Elmer sent 240 volts surging through her outstretched body. Prior to the attack, Elmer had replaced the fuses of the house with heavy wires to prevent them shorting out. At this point, the couple's 3 children were sleeping only meters away. Elmer, satisfied that his wife was dead, made his way to the bedroom his 2 daughters shared. Standing over Catherine's bed, he raised his arm and brought a hammer down with enough force to shatter the right side of her head. She writhed, causing him to bring down another brutal blow to the center of her forehead, shattering her skull yet again. He used an electrocution device, similar to the one he used on Teresa, to make sure she was dead, resulting in alligator clip marks on her head and hand. Elmer turned his attention to his 6-year-old daughter Karen, sleeping on the other side of the room. Again, raising his hammer high and driving it down to the right side of her head, killing her instantly. By this time, Elmer's son James had stirred and made his way into the hallway, presumably disturbed by the noise coming from the neighbouring rooms. Elmer followed him as he made his way to the master bedroom, Striking him to the head from behind, as he entered the room, he fell lifeless at the side of his parents' bed. Elmer removed the alligator clips from his dead wife and clipped them to James's ear and hand, then turned on the switch. Elmer wrapped the bodies of his family in blankets. They were dragged one by one to the family car and piled in the back. The rear seat had previously been removed in preparation for the event. Elmer covered the bodies in more blankets and a tarpaulin. The remaining space in the car was used to load fuel containers and his small motor scooter. With his silent passengers in the back, Elmer drove into the night. His destination, 3 hours away. Approximately 11:45 p.m. that night, car headlights were seen in the distance from a house located near the Blowhole Cliff area. Elaine Blair reported seeing the lights shining towards her house in the distance. Thinking it odd, but not being overly concerned, she went to bed. Little did she know, during this time, Elmer was scurrying to fill the drainage channel with rocks to create a bridge, driving his car to the cliff's edge and sending it crashing to the rock ledge below. His small motor scooter providing a convenient mode of transport to disappear into the night. In Glenroy the following day, there were a number of sightings of Elmer at his house prior to Constable McCarty's visit. One eyewitness reported seeing him walk along his driveway to his front gate and look each way down the street. There was also a report that a couple had seen him walking to a bus stop with a case in hand. Even more incriminating is the fact that the police that attended the Crawford house upon the second visit observed that an attempt had been made to clean up the blood. The house also appeared to have been left in a hurry by whoever had been doing the cleaning. A teacup was found half full, and a half-eaten bowl of cereal contained milk that still smelt fresh. Blood was also discovered on a canvas bag strapped to the motor scooter. What picture was Elmer trying to paint with all this planning? It can be assumed that his plan for the disposal of the car containing his family's bodies did not go as expected. If the car had made it into the water, the deep chasm of the blowhole would have engulfed the evidence. Elmer could have pleaded ignorance as to the whereabouts of his family, citing Teresa's previous breakdown as grounds for her instability and likely motive to take off with the kids. If the car had landed in the water, but had eventually been discovered, the hose attached to the exhaust would still corroborate this theory, indicating a murder-suicide committed by the children's unstable mother. Only the children had sustained skull fractures. His wife, free of any sign of hammer wounds, could still be implicated in their murder. Elmer would be free to enjoy his savings and his assets, free from questioning and the implication of guilt. The car landing on the rocks, however, put him in a difficult situation, and upon hearing of its early discovery, prompted an exit from public view. With so much planning, it became apparent that this was a callous, premeditated murder of his wife and children. But what had gone so wrong that made Elmer see this as his only way out? Newspaper clippings and letters found at the house paint a picture of there being some trouble in paradise for the Crawfords. Below the surface of being an average suburban family, there seemed to be trouble brewing. Teresa had recently informed Elmer that she was pregnant with a fourth child, and this was not welcome news. As mentioned, following the birth of their third child, Teresa wasn't coping and soon ended up having a breakdown. Although she made a recovery, Elmer viewed this as a time he would rather not have to relive. He also indicated that he didn't feel they were in a position financially for another mouth to feed. There are various newspaper clippings of opinion pieces discussing abortion that Teresa had kept, obviously struggling with the decision and presumably being guided towards that option by Elmer. This was something that Teresa had wrestled with due to her Catholic background. The question can then be asked, why couldn't Alma simply walk away from the burden of family life without disposing of them so brutally? A theory is that divorce would have robbed him of his assets and his savings. It also came to light that he was stealing supplies from work and selling them for profit. The estimation of the value of these items was in the thousands. If Teresa had known about this, a divorce would leave open too many loose ends. But putting speculation aside, whatever the reason, it is only known to one person, Alma Crawford. Newspapers at the time followed the story closely. Searches continued around Port Campbell region, and reporters even suggested they were looking for his body to wash up in the region. As time went on, the trail went cold. Alma had become a ghost. Then, on the 29th of January, 1973, as quickly as he had disappeared, Alma Crawford appeared again. News broke of a man who was killed in a car crash near Cobram, a rural area 3 hours north of Melbourne. Matching Alma's description, an itinerant fruit picker going by the name of Harry Crawford was found by the side of the road, killed in a motor vehicle accident. Police made the statement that they believed it to be Alma and began examining forensic evidence. They were confident they had found their killer. The following day, however, the same papers that had reported the discovery of Crawford's body updated the public that it was a false alarm. The state's most wanted was still on the run. If we fast forward to 1994, to the city of Perth, the capital of Western Australia. A colleague of Crawford, prior to the murders, saw a man in Bunbury Hotel bearing a striking resemblance to Alma. She approached the man and asked who he was. He quickly replied that he was a tourist visiting from New Zealand. For whatever the reason, there was a delay in reporting this to the authorities, and searchers failed to locate the mystery man. Mid-July 2010. Police are alerted to the discovery of a body of a John Doe in the Texan city of San Angelo in the United States. The man's fingerprints had been deliberately removed prior to death, and he is carrying a range of photo identification bearing different names. The media swooped on the story and were eager to report that this was Alma Crawford.
A 40-year-old cold case in Victoria appears close to being solved. Alma Crawford disappeared after his wife and 3 children were murdered in 1970.
Police have been hunting Alma Crawford since 1970 after his pregnant wife Teresa and their 3 children were bashed and electrocuted in their Melbourne home. In a failed bid to cover his tracks,
the bodies of a family murdered 40 years ago to prove their dead killer has been found. DNA is the only option because the man's fingerprints have been removed.
But this would not be the conclusion to the Alma Crawford story.
A chance to solve one of Victoria's most gruesome cold cases has vanished. Facial recognition experts thought an unidentified body in the US could be that of Alma Crawford. He disappeared in 1970 after murdering his wife and 3 children and dumping their bodies at Port Campbell. But DNA from a Crawford relative does not match the mystery man. A $100,000 reward still stands.
While some people have disputed the validity of the Western Australian sighting, in 2008, detectives travelled to Perth on information they had been given that he may be living there. To add an even broader scope to this search, police have alerted authorities in Ireland, fearing he may have fled to his place of birth. To this day, over 40 years later, a case listing on crimestoppers.com.au detailing the case of the murdered Crawford family still exists. A $100,000 reward is still in place for information that leads to an arrest of Alma Kyle Crawford. Alma would be 86 at the time this podcast goes to air. For those wanting to read more about this case, I would highly recommend the book Almost Perfect, The True Story of the Crawford Family Murders by Greg Fogarty. It's available on digital, and paperback format.